it has felt many years long past due time to ask you for a piece. And of course, we've known each other for longer than either one of us is. We're not old enough to know each other that long. Um,
Exactly.
and we've did some things when you were in Boston, and I've wanted to do something of yours for a long time, and wanted to ask you for something. And then when all hell broke loose over the last several months in the U.S., I thought, well, I think it's time to give Anthony a call because he could certainly respond to this in the most. Um, I wanted somebody that could respond to it in an authentic way, but also somebody that writes good music.
Well, thank you.
That will and create something that wasn't there before. So I asked you, and you very graciously and kindly agreed to write me a piece, and then the theme presented itself to you. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so some time ago, I spent a month at the Gettysburg National Military Park doing a residency in this Daniel Klingel farmhouse, which is an original Civil War building, which at one point had about 100 or so dead bodies piled up in this house.
Wow.
And doing this residency for a month in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which is an oddly magical place, and getting a chance to interact with the battlegrounds and the memorabilia in the museum and seeing the cyclorama, which at one point was in Boston and then they moved it panel by panel back to Gettysburg.
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
Okay.
a
Yeah.
really interesting connection between Gettysburg and Boston.
Hmm.
But seeing all of this and learning about this particular battle in the Civil War really got me connected in a rather unexpected way to this part of history. But besides all of that, the very first day that I was there, I went for a walk into town and I passed by this old African Methodist Episcopal church. And I saw this plaque that said that this church housed soldiers after the Battle of Gettysburg and housed Black soldiers, which was another controversial thing at that time, unfortunately.
Right.
So I decided to go to church that Sunday, and I had I was not prepared for what was about to happen. So I'm walking towards the church and I'm expecting to hear the typical loud music and shouting and praising that's characteristic of Black churches. And I heard nothing, and I was a little bit late, but I thought it's a Black church. Black people, we're kind of late when we go to Black churches. It's a thing.
I'm glad you
But
said that and I didn't.
I didn't see anybody walking towards the church. I saw this one Black family and I thought, oh, this is great. We're going to go into the church. And he just kept on walking with his children past the church. And I just thought, what is going on? I don't see cars. And I walked in, and there was this congregation of about 3 or 4 people, and nobody was at the organ or the piano. The pastor just had this boombox, this old boombox connected to a sound system, playing the canniest of canned accompaniments for the church music. I'm sitting there thinking, all right, something is going on, but I don't want to leave. I feel like I need to stay. So at one point, the pastor asked if there are any visitors to please stand up and introduce yourself. And I love that language, if there are any visitors.
Amongst the four of
So
you.
exactly. So I introduced myself and I guess graciously explained that I play piano and have extensive experience playing in church. And towards the end of the service, he asked if I would play for the congregation. I said, "Yeah, of course. I was expecting to do this anyway. I kind of wanted to do this, so I'm really glad that you asked and got rid of the canned music. So after I played, there's this moment when the pastor calls the congregation to the altar for intercessory prayer. And right after the prayer, the only white person in this room who was in the congregation had this massive confession that he, at one point growing up in Arizona, was a racist. And he said that. He said, I was a racist. And everyone just had their mouths wide open. And he was explaining how his family was racist and talked using racist vernacular, and he had racist epithets towards the Latinos and indigenous people and the Black people that he grew up around. And it was only during the past 10 or 15 years where he has confronted this part of his past. And he frequents this church. He said around once a month or so.
Hmm.
But he also said that he was grateful for the pastor and the congregation to allow him to worship with everybody. And he hoped that everyone would consider him a brother. So at that point, I was just in tears. I could not hold back anything. It was crazy. So many other people, well, actually the four other people that were
Okay.
there were also crying. And I turned to him and I said, "You're my brother." And I gave him a big hug. And I remember needing to let this moment stew. And the next day, I just wrote it frantically down in a journal that I had been keeping for this residency, knowing that one day would come where I could use this material. So when you asked me to write this piece, it was a no-brainer.
Ah,
Yeah. So
beautiful.
I can't thank you enough for asking me to write this piece and allowing me to use this material in a musical way.
Well, I'm happy to be, you know, I don't even know what the I'm happy you had the experience and I happened to be there. That's spectacular, Anthony. That's beautiful. I have a couple little questions to ask you specifically about the piece itself. Um, one is more literal. Is there seems to be, and I'm never sure where to draw the line, some kind of overt literal symbolism going on in the piece, as well as a more general, some more general references. There's, you can talk about quotations also. Um, there are a sustained passage where you describe as awkward, which kind of seems to portray the incident. But also, I don't know how easily people can hear it. The passages are in two different times.
Yeah.
The right hand playing in three and the left hand playing the other way around, right hand in five and left hand in three, which is like two different cultures. I don't know if that was literal, and even more literal, and you'll have to tell me if this is the, oh yeah, right, or you're crazy. The beginning, towards the beginning, with the white key glissandos and the end, the black key glissandos, is there on purpose? Was that in your mind?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh,
I think you definitely picked it up. I didn't even tell you that going into the piece, and I didn't write it in the program notes, but it's great to work with a musician who has a brain and can pick up on these things, because I put subtle gems like this in all of my music for
yeah.
people to maybe search for. And if they find it, that's great. If they don't, it's fine, because I think I put enough in the music to get a nice interpretation. But those little things,
Fantastic.
especially what you just said, that's what really brings the musician to another level of understanding. So thank you so
Right,
much.
and it's this thing that's, I can't speak to hear it because I know it
Yeah.
inside, but it's, if you listen carefully, there's a subtle difference, but unless you're sitting there, it's hard to know what it is. The other,
Yeah, and
yeah, go
stuff
ahead.
like this isn't necessarily for the audience.
Right,
Um, I grew up playing
mm,
piano, so
right.
I like to give little gifts, little secrets for the pianist.
Well, that leads me
Yeah.
to my last question, which is maybe a little more provocative. I will never know that feeling that you're describing. How do you feel about me? How do you feel about the white guy playing this piece?
This music isn't for a specific person, and I have written pieces for specific people to play,
The way
but
Duke Ellington would. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. But I think there is enough in this story for people to throw themselves into this situation, no matter who they are, no matter where they've come from. Um, and I'm actually I prefer it when somebody white reads a story like this and engages
right,
with that type of journey. Even if you've never had that journey before, it's better for you to know that there are people who have gone through that and
right,
to try to put yourselves in their shoes, because putting yourself in their shoes would also allow you to see the Black people around in that situation with much more clarity and depth.
right.
And that process definitely makes it into the interpretation of the piece.
Spectacular.